As you can see on the page, we have a bunch of static data being showed on the page. And if I head straight to Visual Studio Code, you can see the code being reflected in the browser. We currently don't have any form of functionality, just a bunch of HTML and CSS that helps us to design the page. Currently, we just have the products components, the navbar components, as well as the footer components. We also have our routes, which is already created for us. We have the product routes, which is the only current route available. Another thing we need to take note of is we currently have our server currently running on port 8000. So we can now begin with the integration. First thing I want to do is to generate a new service file. To do that, I'm going to stop the server and run the command ng generate service, and then I'm going to generate the service inside the services folder, and the service is going to be called products. We currently have Node version 16 in our terminal, but for us to make use of Angular 17, we need to make use of Node version 18. So I'm going to make use of nvm use 18 to switch to version 18 of our Node server. So we can now regenerate the service folder. As you can see, we now have the product service generated for us. Let's head back to Visual Studio Code and then configure our provide HTTP clients. The provide HTTP clients allows us to have access to the HTTP client module, which allows us to communicate with our REST API. So this is done inside of the app.config.ts file. So within the providers array we have right here, we need to import the provide HTTP clients by importing provide HTTP clients from @angular/common/http. And before we proceed, I would like us to generate our environmental variables folder. So back in the terminal, I can run the command ng generate environment. With this folder, we will be able to configure our REST API URL. So back in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open environment.development.ts file, and within this object, I'm going to create two keys. The first key is going to be production, which is going to be set as false, and then we need to configure the API URL. So I'm going to say API_URL, and then it's going to be HTTP in lowercase /localhost:8000/API, which is the part of our REST API. I'm going to save that, close that file, as well as the app config file. Then we can head straight to our services file. In the services file, before we get started, I would like to import our environmental API URL as a variable. So to do that, right above, I'm going to say REST API is equals to, I'm going to make use of backtick as well as the $sign. I'm going to open a bracket and say environment, which is imported from the environment.development. It's going to be environment.api URL/products, which is the endpoint to get the list of all our products. Next up, in the constructor, I'm going to create a private class by saying private HTTP client. Before we create the function that helps us to get all the list of products, I would like us to create an interface. So within the app directory, I'm going to create a new folder called interface. And within the interface folder, we are going to create a file called API-response.ts. Inside here, we can type in export interface and then the name of our interface, which I'm going to call products. And this product is the shape in which we expect the data we are trying to get from the backend. The first data is going to be the ID, which is going to be a type of number, and then we expect the title, which is going to be a type of string. Then we expect a description, which is also going to be a type of string, as well as the price, a type of number. Then we expect to get the discount percentage, which is also going to be a type of number. Then we expect the rating, the stock is supposed to be a type of number, the brand, category, thumbnail, counter, which is going to be a type of number, and then finally the quantity. This is the data we expect to get from our REST API. So I'm going to close the API-response.ts file and head straight to the product service file. So within this file, I'm going to create a comment that says get product, and then let's create a get product function, which is going to be an observable, and then we're going to pass in the product interface, which is going to be an empty array by defaults. Then within the bracket, we're going to return this.http.get because it's a get request, and then we expect it to come in form of the product interface. And then we can now pass in our REST API URL by making use of backticks by saying this.rest API. As you can see, we have an error here that says cannot find name observable. That means we need to import observable from RxJS. So I'm going to type right under the product interface import observable from RxJS, and that right there should get rid of the error. So we've been able to create the method for our product service. Quickly, I'm going to head straight to our product components so that we can consume the REST API which we just created. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a variable called products right above, and it's going to be a type of product, and it's going to be an empty array by default. We need to import it inside of our products.ts file. Then within the constructor, we need to bring in the product service file by typing in private for product service. Next up, we need to make use of the ng on init lifecycle hook by typing in ng on init, and then we need to import it by calling implement on init, and then within the @angular/core, we need to import it right there. So with that, we have access to the ng on init lifecycle hook, which allows us to render the data when the page loads. So finally, let's create a get product method to help us consume the REST API. So to do this, we're gonna say this.productService.get product, which is the method we created in our service file, and we're going to subscribe to this because it's an observable, and because it's an observable, it's going to return 3 observers, which are next, error, and complete. So the first observer is next. This is the observer that helps us to get the data if the data is successful. So I'm just going to say products, make use of a fat arrow, and then within the brackets I can say this dot products is equals to product. Next, we can create the second observer, which is the error, but this time around it's going to be within an alert window method, and I'm going to pass in the error. And finally, the complete. This means all our request is complete. I can just log in into the console data fetched. So to be sure our data is coming properly from the REST API, so I'm just going to log to the console is.products, and then within the ng on init lifecycle hook, I'm going to call the method by saying this.getProducts. So we can save everything we've done so far, head straight to the browser, and we need to start our server. So by running ng-serve, as you can see, our server has finished compiling, and in the server I'm going to refresh to be sure everything is working fine. So I'm going to inspect, head to the console. As you can see, we have access to our data. We have 5 results coming from the REST API, which we can see right here. So what we need to do is to get the data we have here displaying in the browser instead of the static data we have right here. So in the product component.html file, what we're going to do is to make use of the ng4 structural directive. So I'm going to get rid of all the static data except one. So we just have one data showing on the browser. So we can now loop through this particular data by calling ng4 is equals to let product of products. So let products of products, and the first thing we want to replace is the image. So I'm going to get rid of this static image we have right here, and then we're going to make use of interpolation by saying products.thumbnail. Then another thing is the title of the product. So I can just say products.title, and then finally the price. I can get rid of this static price by clearing it off and saying products.price, and then we can save and check the results in the browser. As you can see, we have all the data showing in the browser, and with that we've completed the integration of the observable as a means of fetching data from the backend.
If you want to keep learning about how to build real-world apps with the latest technologies and other career-related topics, then start right now by subscribing to our channel and liking this video.